Thank you. The world around us is increasingly diverse. No wall or Muslim ban can keep us apart, thank heavens. So the question of this session is more important than ever. How can we build a really inclusive society? How can we make sure that all voices are heard? It is an enormous challenge, and we have a long way to go, but look how far we have come in a pretty short time to advance the rights of women, of indigenous peoples, of the LGBTQ community, and of people of color. But there is one form of discrimination that hardly anyone talks about: ageism, viejismo, edadismo, the last socially sanctioned prejudice. We experience ageism any time someone thinks that we are too old for something, a task, a relationship, a haircut, instead of finding out who we are and what we're capable of. Or too young. Ageism cuts both ways. Older people experience more of it because we live in a youth-obsessed culture. But young people also experience bias and discrimination. That's why I don't like the term viejismo, because it suggests that only old people experience this, when in fact, ageism affects everyone. It is any judgment about a group of people or an individual on the basis of how old we think they are. We are bombarded with negative messages about aging from childhood on. Wrinkles are ugly. Old people are incompetent. It's sad to be old. We older people can be the most ageist of all because we have had a lifetime to absorb these messages and never thought to challenge them. It is infinitely harder to unlearn these messages, and it is an ongoing task, as I am always reminded. I just recently stopped blaming my sore knee on being 65 because my other knee does not hurt, and it is just as old. Confronting bias is uncomfortable, and it doesn't come naturally. You can take a baby elephant and tie it up with a rope, and the elephant will soon learn it can't get away. The same rope does the job when the elephant is the size of a Volkswagen, and the rope pulls tighter over time. As we get older and age-related stereotypes become more likely, we tend to act as though they were accurate, and that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Unless we challenge the underlying message, which is that to age is to lose value as a human being, that rope pulls tighter over time, and that idea becomes part of our identity. And like the elephant, we collude in our own disempowerment, and we stay tied up. All isms, sexism, ageism, racism, are socially constructed ideas. And what that means is we make them up, and they change over time. They are not about how we look. They are about how people in power assign meaning to how we look. All prejudice legitimizes and sustains inequalities between groups in order to maintain the status quo, like auto workers in the US competing against auto workers in Mexico instead of organizing for better wages. Ageism pits the young against the no longer young, as if one group can only profit at the expense of the other. In fact, communities that are good to grow old in, which have good social services and parks and public transportations, are good for families and good for parents and good for commuters and good for tourists. They are good for all ages, of course. All prejudice relies on seeing the other group of people as other than ourselves, other nationality, other religion, other race. The strange thing about ageism is that that other person is us, our own future selves. So ageism feeds on denial when we pretend that we are never going to become that future older person, that we might get old, that we might even be old. It is denial when we try to pass for younger, or believe in anti-aging products, or feel like our bodies are betraying us just because they are changing. Why on earth do we stop celebrating the ability to adapt and change and grow as we move through life? Why should aging well mean struggling to look and act like younger versions of ourselves? It is embarrassing to be called out as older until we stop being embarrassed about it. And it is not healthy to go through life dreading our futures. When cars are hard to open, or there's no railing to lean on, or we can't open the jar, we think, I should be stronger, or I should be better prepared. We blame our own aging instead of the ageism that makes these natural barriers, acceptable and these natural transitions shameful. It is not loving a man that makes life harder for gay guys. It's homophobia. It's not having a vagina that makes life harder for women. It's sexism. And it is not the passage of time that makes getting older so much harder than it should be, especially in America. It is ageism. The more clearly we see these social forces at work in ourselves and in the world around us, the easier it is to come up with alternative, more positive, and more accurate narratives. And the longer we wait, the more damage it does to ourselves and our place in the world. More and more older people like me are expanding the definition of working age because we want to work longer and because we have to. And of course, longer lives require working longer and saving more. And yet, age discrimination in the workplace is everywhere. The personal and economic consequences are devastating. How are older people supposed to support ourselves if we're forced out of the job market? Not one stereotype about older workers holds true, that we are less competent, less creative, less committed, to name just a few. Companies that are diverse in age aren't just better places to work, they work better. An information society, right? Not that many people work on farms anymore or do work that requires physical strength, which is the one thing that for sure you do lose with age. In an information society, the deep knowledge base that older people possess is more valuable than ever. Experience is an asset, not a liability. Obvio, that's my favorite word in Spanish. Push back against age discrimination, and workers of all ages benefit. The flexibility and accessibility that older workers require is also great for students, or for people working more than one job, or for someone with a disability, and people doing the important work of caring for others. There's a growing body of fascinating research that shows that attitudes towards aging have an actual, measurable, physical effect on how our bodies function. People with positive feelings towards aging walk faster, they heal faster, and they live longer. And even some people with brains who, when they died and they looked at their brains, they were full of plaques and tangles, but they stayed completely sharp to the end. And they studied what those people had in common. And what they had was a sense of purpose. For them, life had some kind of meaning. Maybe to change the world, maybe to see a grandchild graduate from college. So think about what the biggest obstacle is to having a sense of purpose in late life. A culture that tells us that getting older means shuffling off stage and becoming invisible. That's why the World Health Organization is developing a global anti-ageism campaign to extend not just lifespan, how long we live, but health span, how much of that life we spend in good health. Women face the combined effects of ageism and sexism, so we experience aging differently. There's a double standard at work here, such a surprise. The notion that aging enhances men and diminishes women. And we women reinforce that standard when we compete to stay young. A punishing and losing proposition. No one can be any younger than they are. This double discrimination affects our income, our health, and our well-being, and the effects add up over time. And they are further compounded by race and by class, which is why everywhere in the world, the poorest of the poor are old women of color. Most of us hope to have some control over how and why and when we die. The best way to get that is to have an ongoing discussion about what we hope for and what we're afraid of, ideally well ahead of time, and ideally on an ongoing basis, because you don't know what you're going to want until it happens, until we get there. Those conversations are a lot less likely if we pretend we're not getting any older, not to mention that someday we won't be here anymore. An ageist society often casts this end-of-life problem in terms of the growing numbers of old people who inconveniently refuse to die. The underlying issue is the changing nature of healthcare, which defaults to expensive and profitable interventions to prolong life at any cost. In any condition, at any age, everyone has the right to want to stay alive. Whether in school, at work, at prayer, or at play, age segregation impoverishes us because it cuts us off from most of humanity. I think this age segregation is worse in the United States, where it is very rare for someone to be friends with someone who is more than 10 years older or younger than them, who is not a family member. Exchanging skills and stories across generations is, of course, the natural order of things, and an intergenerational world is straight up a better world. Thanks largely to clean water and antibiotics, diseases like cancer and heart disease, thank you, science, are getting more rare, we're treating them better, and more children are surviving to adulthood, so that means that our world is getting older fast. And fertility rates have dropped also. Longer population aging is a function of fewer children being born, actually, and more people living longer. By 2050, 1 in 5 people around the world, almost 2 billion people, will be age 60 and up. Longer lives are a fundamental hallmark of human progress. All these older people represent a vast, unprecedented, and untapped resource. These longer lives, though, are new. This is a new, massive global phenomenon. And the institutions around us were created when lives were shorter. For example, the idea that education is for the young, and then you work in the middle third of your life, and then you retire, is clearly obsolete. But the roles and the institutions to support this new longevity have yet to evolve. So this gives us a critical opportunity to shape that world. So what would that world look like? Well, creating truly inclusive societies means adding age to ethnicity and gender and religion and class, the components of diversity, right? Discrimination on the basis of age is no more acceptable than discrimination on the basis of anything else about ourselves that we cannot change. We don't allocate resources by race or by sex. So weighing the needs of the old against the young is equally unacceptable, period. You see this, you hear this argument all the time around healthcare. Why should we spend money on old people who are going to die soon, even though they don't say that part aloud, when we could spend it on children? And the argument is not acceptable on fundamental ethical grounds. And lastly, human rights do not diminish with age. Age discrimination is a global human rights and social justice issue. Almost 2/3 of people over 60 around the world say that their income does not pay for basic services like water, electricity, food, and decent shelter. Almost 2/3 say they find it hard to get health care. Is this the world we want our children, many of whom will live to be 100, to inherit? If we want to make the world a better place for longer lives and make the most of longer lives in every arena, not just our personal lives, how we feel when we look in the mirror, but addressing and putting a global human rights issue on the map, we need to work together to raise awareness of ageism and to end it. And this will require nothing less than a mass movement, like the women's movement. The critical starting point is, of course, as we have heard so many times already in this Congreso, is inside each of us. That we have to look at our own attitudes towards age and aging, our own bias. We are all biased because you can't change bias unless you're aware of it. And then work, so think about how we feel about aging and the company we keep and the years ahead and why. And then work towards making our own behavior and attitudes less ageist. And then take that change out into the world. Only then can we recognize and value the very real differences between youth and age and put them to use without turning them into a system of inequity where one group benefits at the expense of the other. Aging is not a problem to be fixed or a disease to be cured, right? Otherwise living would be a disease. If you wake up in the morning, you're aging. Aging is a powerful, natural, lifelong process that unites us all. It is the only universal human experience. Everyone, all ages, all races, all genders, all nationalities, of course, is old or future old. And until we put a stop to it, ageism will oppress us all. So why, you might ask, add another ism to the list when so many, racism in particular, call out for action? Here's the thing. We don't have to choose. When we make the world a better place to grow old in, we make it a better place to be a woman, to have a disability, to be queer, to be non-rich, to be non-white. And when we show up at all ages for whatever matters most to us, right? Social justice, save the whales, save the oceans, whatever it is. If we have people of all ages around the table, we do two important things. We make that effort, whatever it is, more effective, and we dismantle ageism in the process. So you don't have to choose between ageism and racism, or the whales and social justice. Longevity is here to stay. A movement to end ageism is underway. I'm in it, and I hope you will join me. Thank you.